Hi, welcome to Here to Then, hosted by Carolyn Taketa, former attorney, current small groups pastor, and life coach. Through monthly conversations with pastors, authors, and guests, we hope to stir your thoughts and encourage you to move from where you are to where you want to be, in your personal life, in your leadership, or in your ministry.
Hi, welcome to Group Talk. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Carolyn Taketa, your host and the Executive Director of Small Groups at Calvary Community Church in Westlake Village, California. Well, our topic today is one that's very near and dear to all of our hearts as small group pastors and directors. So if I were to ask you, what is one of the biggest challenges in your small groups ministry, consistently, I would bet that one of the ones in the top three would probably be the challenge of getting new group leaders. And this is kind of the meat and potatoes of what we do, we year in, year out. And the reality is, if we want to keep growing our ministry and connecting more people in our church into small group communities, then we need a constant supply of new leaders. And so this issue is pretty critical, but especially now in the summer before our fall season, when typically most of our churches start promoting and starting new groups. So July is a great time to talk about this topic, to plan ahead and execute well in time to have a great harvest of new leaders in the fall. So today, with me on the program today is Daniel Thomas. Thanks, Daniel, for joining us.
That's my pleasure.
So Daniel is the campus pastor at Elizabethan Campus and director of adult ministries at Highland Fellowship Church in Abingdon, Virginia. How do you pronounce that? I probably mashed that.
Nah, you did all right. Abingdon, Virginia.
Abingdon, Virginia. Okay, this is where the lovely accent comes from, yes?
Yep.
Daniel's been serving in that role as the campus pastor and the director of adult ministries for several years. And prior to that, he served as Highland Small Groups director, as well as his leadership development pastor. And this I found really interesting, Daniel, that you are a business owner for both a coffee house and a McDonald's for like 15 years. So you've got definitely some business experience to bring to bear on this topic as well. And I'm kind of curious, have you seen how God can use some of those skills in the business world that transfers over into ministry world, especially small groups? Like, what's one transferable skill that you think carried over into the ministry world for you?
Oh, well, I think there's a lot really in that, Carolyn. I think one of the big things is it's all about customer service.
Right.
It's about the people. Why are we in business, and how are we serving those that God's entrusted to us in that sense? So realizing that no matter, even in the business world, you can't be profitable without a team in that sense. So how are we best serving those on our team? You have two sets of customers. You got internal and external. So, I think just that mindset that everything we do is, one of my perspective as a leader, they're not here to serve me. I'm here to serve them and help them move this agenda forward, so to speak, or our vision and mission. So I think one of the biggest takeaways is that customer service mindset.
Right. Well, and especially because you went food service, which is high customer service, a lot of cranky customers probably as well. Not that we don't have any of those in church ever.
No, never.
But it's a great jumping off point for this topic because, what have you learned about identifying, if you're going to hire a good employee and then you want to recruit them? I'm sure there's some things you've learned about identifying those kinds of people that you're going to want on your team.
Sure. And when you're thinking about that, whether it's in the business world, if I'm thinking about in the restaurant industry, whether it was our coffee house or whatever, it's kind of a fit. What business are we in? So when we was in the coffee house, you think about what's the feel of the coffee house, what's our DNA, what's our makeup, so to speak, and who's best going to create that for us. And so you're looking for fit for personalities and things like that in that regards. So when we're thinking about in the church world as well, I think when we're looking at identifying new leaders, I think about the same thing. If you think about a leader, it goes back to our systems.
Right.
It's not just about knowing the vision, mission of the church. I think that's critical. But there's so many different models. Actually, I Googled this one time. And I Googled a question was how to identify small group leaders.
Okay. So we don't need the podcast then, Daniel. The people can just Google this.
Well, here's the crazy. Over 1 million hits or results on just that one question there. Wow. I was like, wow, I didn't realize. So one, it is a very relevant question. People are asking that question. How do we identify them? Or so many people wouldn't be talking about it and trying to answer that question because it really is. How, just like what you mentioned in the intro, to have a sustainable model, continue to grow, to make disciples and make disciples, we've always got to have an influx of leaders. Right. And so then in that sense, how do we identify those, and really what model best works with us to move our vision and mission forward?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yes. Yes, so let's talk about that. What are some of the different models we see in small group world for finding, identifying, and recruiting small group leaders?
Wow, there's a lot of them. I mean, you got we utilize here is the campaign strategy host model. It's very lowered the bar, so to speak, in a sense.
Right.
But it worked for us. It's a model. There's also, we've done things like the group link. We've done that before. You've got the turbo groups. You've got the apprenticing. And the thing is, all of these work, and they all work really well.
Well, let's break some of them down so that in case people aren't familiar with it, just in a nutshell, let's say, okay, so the first one, the host model, which is what you guys do, which is made famous by Saddleback Church, kind of the ones that started that. Okay, so what are like just the brief description of what that model looks like in terms of identifying and recruiting leaders?
Sure. So when it comes to identifying and recruiting leaders within the host model, really it's you're just championing the vision. You're trying to get church-wide alignment. But to do that, when you're willing to say to people, you're opening up you're widening who you can pull from there, so to speak. When you say to the congregation, hey, we want everybody to be in a small group, we want you to host a small group, you're kind of really having a wide gate there for people to come in that sense. So the value of that is you do get potentially a lot of group leaders.
Right, so you don't have to be a member of the church. You don't have to be necessarily, it depends. Everybody does the model a little differently, but let's say the most open version of the model would be you don't have to necessarily be a member. You don't necessarily have to even be a regular attender.
Sure, and exactly. And so what we did one time, now we've always done a host model, but also we did that a host model with some stipulations. Okay. Like there for a long time, host model where the stipulation was you have to be a group. And so when we would cast that vision for group leaders, if someone signed up to be a small group leader before the campaign, then we would try and get them through our membership class to ensure that they're a member before it kicks off. Okay. So because
modified.
we modified it some. But then what we recently did that really worked for us, we thought, okay, we're providing the content for people to teach and lead through their small group. So it said if we're providing the training, then who do we not want to lead a group? And so we said, if we're providing the teaching, the biblical teaching is coming from our lead pastor, it's on video, or we're providing the small group training where we have coordinators and coaches who are helping care for small groups and all that stuff. That kind of helped us to widen that a little bit. But what we started doing, also thinking about was, what's the most important small group that there is? And so as we answered that question, we thought, the family unit.
Yes.
They're important small group in the family unit. So what we did is we came off of that question, and then we opened it up. We said, hey, we want you to host a small group for your family. Oh. And when we had this paradigm shift, so to speak, for us is we started this one year back in 2012, I think it was, and we came out and said, hey, we just want you to host a small group for your family. And what we learned from that, we just really hope people do that. We were just hoping they would just lead a small group for their family, and that was a win. But what we seen was, what we learned afterwards, after we collected the data and evaluated it, we had people coming up to us on Sundays and saying, hey, Pastor Allen said that we could host a small group for our family, but I've got a coworker at work that I really want to invite out to this. Is that okay? And I said, yeah, and so what do you think I said? I said, of course not. Don't invite them out. No, I didn't say that. I said, absolutely. And so, but here's the thing, that just wasn't one question. I remember on that Sunday morning in particular when we first launched this, I had tons of people saying, hey, Pastor Allen said this, but we want to invite our neighbor. I want to invite my family member. And what we learned is that it was intimidating to people when we came out and we said, hey, we want you to host a small group, and we're going to send you 10 people to call, 20 people to call, invite out to your home, set you up on blind dates. That was intimidating. Okay. And they didn't sign up for that in that regards. But when we started saying, hey, we just want you to host this for your family, we lowered the bar, so to speak, and said, hey, here's what we're asking. We're just asking you to do this for your family. Then they started automatically thinking about, well, okay, I'll do this for my family, but I'm going to invite whomever's really close to me that I trust into this small group as well. And I really believe that because we gave them an easy in, so to speak, they said yes on their own. Then they, in turn, started thinking about people they can invite. Now, that's what we wanted to happen. We didn't know it happened just like that. I'd like to say it was perfectly planned, but it wasn't. But because we're as willing to wrestle with our paradigm and is what we're doing working, we really want something for us. And so once they said yes to that, they automatically start thinking about people they can invite. Right. Because here's what we've learned. We did what everybody else does. We come out on stage, our lead pastor casts the vision, they promote it, they inspire people. Hey, we want you to do a small group for your, invite your coworkers, invite your neighbors, invite whoever else. And that's still intimidating somewhat from us when we're casting it from stage. But they say yes for themselves. Then they told, that was their idea then, and they owned it.
That's interesting.
And it worked.
Yeah, it sounds like it worked really well. Okay, let's talk about the group link model.
Yep.
And probably the biggest well-known church for that is North Point.
Yep.
And so just briefly kind of talk through that and what would be the strength of that model.
Yeah, the strengths of the group link model is the sense is that when you come into group link, now, again, this can be abbreviated as well with the group link model in a sense that you can still have an interview process ahead of time. So if you're going off the apprentice model, so let's just say some churches will leverage group link and their new group leaders will come from a small group out of last year's group. So if like you run it on a semester basis, let's just say, now I don't know exactly, this is exactly what North Point does there, and just a few churches I've talked to and what we've looked at, is a lot of times when someone runs a group link, you have a requirement to be a group leader. You've had to be in a small group X amount of time, and here's some other requirements. And so then they pull leaders from that to start the new group link so that when you do kick off your small groups, you kick off your small groups in the fall, let's just say first weekend in October, whenever it is. You kick off those small groups. You've got the groups in a central location at the church. Let's just say it's the church.
Typically,
they're not going in someone's home they've not met yet. So the value, I think, of the group link piece is it gives people a neutral environment to begin building your relationships around before moving into the home. And it helps people say yes to checking out a small group. Because really, who wants to go to a small group in someone's home they never met before?
Well, predominantly, that is how a lot of churches do it. That's how we do. Okay, let's talk about group link a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I think one version of that, which is kind of interesting and that has worked for some churches, is that they do gather anyone who's interested in a group then gathers into a large room. They have there's two versions of this. Either they have pre-screened leaders in place. Inside there. And so they kind of gather people that live near them or whatever. Maybe it's, affinity based or gender based or age based, whatever, geography. And then they kind of get to know each other a little bit and then off they go. Another version is where, you don't have pre-screened leaders. And this one's kind of a quick, it used to be called back in the day, quick groups, quick starts. So then you don't have a leader. You sit around these tables, again, by affinity or whatever version you decide for the types of groups you want. And then at the end of the interactions, you say 1, 2, 3, point to the person that you think should lead this group. And I know I can see you nodding. Well, the audience won't be able to hear you nodding, but I've actually tried that a few times in my early days. And surprisingly, when you have no leaders to start off with, it does give you a quick start.
Yeah.
Have you had any experience with that?
Absolutely, and I'm laughing at them because we have done that. We've done that where we've invited people out. We've had them at round tables. They've never met each other before. All that we did is we predefined demographics. Yes. Like it could have been a town, or we've also done demographics in the sense of married, single, men, women, empty nesters. But we've done that. And here's the thing. That really can work in a sense, but it takes some forethought in a sense of what types of questions, because when we did it, we always wanted to think ahead and say, okay, what types of questions are we going to ask that will help people feel comfortable? Because, you don't ask the questions of, how long have you been a Christian? What have you taught? Things like that. But you want to ask those personal type questions. Like one question I love to always ask when, we're opening up, like with a small group or something, I always just like to get to know people. So I've started asking this question here is that if you could be anyone in history for 24 hours, who would you be and why? And what I always say is, okay, you can't choose anyone, and you definitely can't choose Jesus. Can I say that on this podcast?
Well, it kind of I kind of lost you there a little bit, so you couldn't repeat that.
Yeah. So when I asked the question, if you could be anyone in history for 24 hours, who would you be and why? I would always exclude, you can't choose a biblical, choose Jesus Christ, because you might not go through with the whole crucifixion thing and resurrection. So it could be anyone in history, who would that be? And so it gives you some insight into that individual. And, so for me, I'd say, like, if I could be anyone in history for 24 hours, I would be Felix Baumgartner on the day he did the space jump. I mean, wouldn't you just love to be able to go up to the stratosphere like that and just free fall back to Earth, break the sound barriers you're falling, and live? I mean, think about that.
Okay, that wouldn't have been on my list. So see, that reveals something about you, Daniel, right?
Exactly. So it gives you a hint of the person's personality and who they are. So when you're doing this, if you go to the group league thing like that, think about some questions that won't intimidate people, but will also let people know about who they are.
Right. The nice thing about that environment is when I was a little hesitant to do it, but each time we had done it, everyone points to the same person.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of leaders kind of rise, and then they feel so honored, and then it's hard to say no because everybody's pointing at you. So there's that piece. Another model that is great for kind of startups in small groups ministry is kind of the turbo group. That's just a term, but basically is when you handpick potential leaders, and then you as the small group pastor or one of your coaches take a group of them through a small group experience together first, and then with the expectation that you're going to launch them at a given time. Maybe it's usually like a few months later. And when I've heard about people doing that, it's time and labor intensive, but it seems like they say you generally end up with almost all of the people in the mix. So you'll end up with about 80 to 90% of those people, and you've invested in them. So then they know what you're expecting. So if you have like a 6-month window, that might be a good way to go.
Absolutely. Like you said, that gives you time to build into the people. It gives you an opportunity to coach them along the way. But like you said, it is labor intensive. It does require effort. And again, it goes back to the question, does that fit our method and model and really even the personality of the leadership of the church? Right.
And so I guess that's really the key question. Really, whatever model you choose, it really has to fit and be in your context. And then maybe let's turn to that idea. Okay, so we should all be considering, what is it that our leadership and our church culture needs? Like, what are the essentials? For a church that wants a 2-year class and membership and a lot of Bible scholarship before they can lead a group, obviously something like the host model won't work. But what would you say, Daniel, is like the non-negotiable must-have attributes of a leader?
Well, for us, what we're looking for in a small group leader in our context is, because like I said, we do the host model. So the 3 things I kind of look for is I'm looking for someone that's a people person. Now I'm not asking the question, are you introverted, extroverted? Because personally, I am introverted. I'm not going to walk into a room and I'm not going to be the life of the party. But I like people, a small number of people, and I can be hospitable. So I want to find someone they're just genuinely a people person, and they just like people. And the next thing I'm looking for is someone that's teachable, and I think about humility in that sense. So I'm looking for someone that likes people, that have a smile on their face, and people tend to like to be around them. in that regards, because in the teachable thing, we can talk about that in a moment. But also then finally, the third thing is just a desire to grow spiritually. And now when I say that is because I'm looking for someone, because our small group mission is to balance a great commandment and a great commission in the heart of every believer. Now, I know many people who are listening to this podcast, I'm not going to say, well, that's Saddleback's.
Well,
sure,
that's
and that's
the Bible.
Okay. That's the Bible, exactly. Now, our vision is experience like the fullest. But what we're wanting to wrestle with is we want people to wrestle with, how do I live out practically my faith in Jesus Christ in that sense. So for a small group leader, I want someone that's a people person, because if they're not a people person, they're not going to be able to lead people. People won't want to come to their small group.
Right.
If they're not teachable, what I've learned over the years, someone can be a great teacher themselves. They can have a lot of knowledge, but if they're not teachable, if they don't have a certain amount of humility about them,
Sure.
Typically they aren't going to consider others as more important than themselves. What I've learned is that throughout small group life, the person that's not teachable tends to be rigid. And so when it comes to these difficult situations in group life, it's their way or the highway.
Right.
And
There's maybe less grace.
There's less grace. It's not as growth opportunities in that regards. And then a desire to grow spiritually. We're looking for people who genuinely they want to grow, and that's the intent of them gathering together in community in some sort. We don't say, hey, you've got to be at this place in your Christian journey, because for our model, what we're going to provide in our context in our church, we're going to provide resources. We're going to give them some video teaching. Now, we have small group leaders. They just take the Bible and they go and they study the Bible. That's great. We encourage that. But for a brand new, we have to have a system where if someone just comes up and says, hey, I just accepted Christ yesterday, and I've got 5 friends who they don't know, they're not Christian, but I want to invite them into this conversation. I want to be able to provide resources for that person to reach their friends.
Right.
So because we are, in our context, we're going to provide resources. I'm not as concerned about how long they've been a Christian.
Right. I think you identified really the key ones, being teachable, desire to grow, and then the first one, maybe I would add to available. When I was in university in college, we used to have this acronym. It's so probably not politically correct, but it was FAT. And when we looked for leaders, we wanted them faithful, available, and teachable. And the faithful thing was that the trajectory of their lives were focused towards Jesus and their own growth. And available was, we're all busy. And available, especially in our busy lives, means that even if they want to lead, if they don't have the bandwidth in their schedule, it's not necessarily going to go well.
Absolutely.
And so we kind of check and ask our leaders, do you have time right now? Is this a good season for you to stretch in this way? Because this will take, so much time. So we don't want it to mislead them into thinking that this is just an easy 1 hour a week deal, because it's not. If they're really leading well, then it involves getting messy in people's lives, and that's can't be limited, right?
Right.
And I want to highlight one of the things you said about the teaching aspect. Sometimes I think we get kind of excited when we see someone who's a Bible teacher, or, we have an ex-pastor that comes across our way, and we're like, oh my gosh, they should be great small group leaders. And interestingly, I think, there's that saying that God equips the called. Well, sometimes the best leaders I have found have not necessarily been the ones that look like they would be the best leaders from the outset. They're really outgoing, gregarious, with a Bible degree and all of that. Yep. And sometimes the best leaders are the kind of the more introverted, the great listener, the shepherding, pastoral heart kind of people, more than the teaching people. I mean, have you experienced that? It's not necessarily what we think.
Absolutely. And I love what you just shared there, because if you take someone who is not necessarily a thinker in a sense of, they're the theologian type, studious, want to just regurgitate everything they learn. But if you take someone who's a great listener and who can learn to ask questions, then when it comes in a small group context of facilitating a conversation amongst the people in the group, that person, then as they listen, they can help draw others into the conversation who wouldn't otherwise. And it helps people take ownership. And so I think you're spot on in that. Is sometimes is that the great small group leaders isn't always the ones that we think would make the best small group leaders, but sometimes to identify those, I've got to think differently and not always think about the checked boxes, so to speak. Does this person have all the qualifications?
Yeah, so let's talk about thinking outside the box. I've asked for referrals from staff. I've asked for, if I meet someone, I pray when I'm in the lobby, God, is there somebody that could lead a group? Because we don't do the host model, so we basically create a list in the summer, an ongoing list throughout the year of potential leaders, and then we start talking to them about it. But any other ways to get new leaders?
Yeah, well, I think when we're thinking about what is it, think outside the box. Again, I think this goes back to our, am I a high control type leader or am I a low control type leader? And when it comes to thinking outside the box, is it just a matter of creativity? Because sometimes when we're thinking about thinking outside the box, I'm thinking differently. So I'd say, how do we do that in that regard? So I'd say if you're in that context right now and you're thinking about how can I recruit new small group leaders in the church, I would just encourage you to do a couple of things. Don't try to think outside the box alone. So if you are a very creative person, bring someone around you like me who's not a very creative person.
Me neither.
My wife can look at a wall and she can be like, oh, this will look great there, and this will look great there, and here's how it'll look. And I have no clue about that. I'm like, it serves its purpose. It's functional. Run with it. That's great. So I'd say don't try to think outside the box alone. Bring someone around you who doesn't necessarily think like you do in that regards. And then and think through with them. Just say, hey, let them know, I'm trying to figure out how to recruit new group leaders. Here's what we're asking of a new small group leader or a small group host. If you were going to be a small group leader, what would help me connect with you in that regards? And so then just listen to them, but don't do it alone. Also, sometimes I think thinking outside the box really does require, at least it does me, it requires me to challenge my method, so to speak. Is my method still being effective in moving forward the vision and mission? And so what I mean by that is, there was a time when part of our method was that you had to be a member to lead a small group. Well, now we don't say that you have to be a member to lead a small group. Because when we're doing a campaign, we're going to give you the materials, we're going to give you the coaching, the training, the resources in that regards to go out and teach it or to go out and facilitate the group. So it required us to think about some of those things. So just be not always, but be willing to wrestle with some of those questions, to think outside the box, because really it's just thinking differently, and doing something in a way that you've never done it before.
Yeah, and that's a good word. I think I asked small group leaders, what made you say yes to us? To see, okay, where's the fears? And could we do something to deal with the fears? What made you say no initially? Sometimes it takes several asks, and they're always honored to be asked, so there's no downside to asking. They could say no, though. So, and some of the things that came up was, I don't know that I can do it. I'm so busy. I don't know enough. And so one thing we started to do is to partner people and say, hey, find somebody that you'd like to spend time with, and you guys can now actually make time to spend together and do it together. And that took away some of the fear, because then at least one other person's going to show up.
Yeah.
And you get that list of 20, and at least one person on there shows up. So having a co-leader thing made it less intimidating. Having a set amount of time, like you don't lead for life, you lead through. Exactly. You might lead for life, but we start out at 6-7 week increment first.
Yeah. Well, I think what you just shared there is great. Is when you're thinking outside the box, always be willing to. Okay, I've got to do something different. I've never done it before, because otherwise we wouldn't want to be. We're not going to try to think outside the box, right?
Right.
Because that's what it's just to think differently. And so as you're doing that, be willing to learn and try new things. And I'd say I'm going to do a shameless plug for the network here as well.
Go for it.
For me to be able to connect with other small group point people, I don't I'm very fortunate to be a part of the church I'm a part of. An amazing staff, an amazing team around us. But even if you come from a church with staff, sometimes we can all think alike, right?
Right.
So being able to be connected with a network of small group point people has been invaluable to me, because I've gotten an opportunity to connect with other small group point people, different backgrounds, whether it's denominationally, whether it's culturally, as far as we're in very rural Southwest Virginia, Northeast Tennessee. So to be able to connect with someone like Nick Lindsay up in Hoboken and New York area helps challenge me to think outside the box, because he is in a faster pace,
Sure.
more environment. So, but to hear his ideas has helped me to think through some of that. So I'd say if you're not connected with a group of point people, pastors, ministry leaders in your and I'd say in particular in the small group world, you're doing a great disservice to the people that God's called you to care for. Because I can't think outside the box if I'm only going to stay in my own little bubble.
Sure.
So I've got to be willing to think outside the box, one, to think different than I've ever done. That requires us to bring people around us who are different than us. And I don't want to say different like a negative way, but it could be, denominationally, even, because even within denominations, there's different
Sure.
ideas and thoughts and theories and such. And I'm not talking about theology.
No, but more like transferable principles.
Exactly.
And ideas, just new, fresh ideas. I love that.
Yep.
And obviously we believe in the network because we both serve in the network. And gosh, this has gone by so fast. So we need to wrap up. And I know you would agree with me that all of this can't happen. We can't get new leaders without the power of prayer.
Absolutely.
And every year I feel anxious, usually around late August, when I'm looking at, okay, we're going to have to connect another whole batch of people and we don't have enough leaders. And then I tell God, these are your people. You need to connect them. We need leaders. And every year he does provide. So I want to encourage our people to make sure that, you pray and leave that with Jesus to take care of. We do our part and we work hard to recruit and identify, but then we let God do his part. Any final thoughts, Daniel?
Yeah, I'd share with this is that when you're looking to recruit new leaders, just like you alluded to it a moment ago, when we're doing a campaign here at Highlands Fellowship, we always want to give an easy on-ramp and easy exit ramp. And that typically is within the confines of time.
Right.
So we'll say, hey, we're not asking you to sign up for a small group for life. And a lot of times it's important that you do that also for a small group leader and say, hey, we're not asking you to lead a group for life, but could you lead a small group for this campaign? And so make sure that you communicate clearly what you are asking of a new small group leader. Don't be ambiguous about it. Don't, just be very clear up front. What are you asking of a small group leader? Cast that vision to them. Because here's what, one of the things I learned. There was a couple in our church, and I live like an hour away from our church, and they came up to me, and we were doing a campaign. And the husband and wife were together. They said, we're really praying about, leading a small group for this campaign. And then they go on to give me a list of 15 reasons they can't do it, right? So, and here's the thing. I didn't try to answer all of their objections. Okay, so when they came to me with that, they said, hey, we're praying about this. We're thinking about being a small group leader for this campaign. And then they list off 15 reasons they couldn't do it. It wouldn't work for them. I just said, okay, that's, hey, it sounds like you're really thinking through this. I just encourage them, say, hey, we're just praying for you. And just pray that God will lead you down the right path to be a leader or not to be a leader and to connect with the group. And so what you said there about prayer is critical. I'll always be praying for them. But because I didn't try to answer all their questions,
Sure.
I didn't come across what I was trying to convince them why they should do it.
You weren't selling it, yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't selling it. But here's what happened. So they come to me. They said, a couple weeks later, they said, hey, we're going to try this. But it's not the best scenario. Our driveway's like this. Our house is like this, so on and so forth. I said, hey, that's great. I'm so excited you're going to lead a group for this campaign. Hey, we're going to have your material. It's going to be amazing. How can we serve you? We've got a care team. We've got a coach, and so on and so forth. So we just, love them and cast vision for them. Week 1 in the campaign, I saw them walk through the church. Said, hey, how's everything going? Oh, it was great. Things went well. But now we're not leading for life. I said, that's okay. I said, that's fine. You can be done in 6 weeks. That's awesome. Thank you for hosting the group during this time period. So week 2 came by. they came and seen them through the mall. I was like, hey, it was great, but hey, we're not doing this forever. I said, that's fine. I said, I'm good with that. Thank you for leading. But here's what was really neat. Around week 4, I think it was, maybe week 5, because it was a 6 weeks campaign, they came to us and they said, Daniel, can we lead this group after this study?
Aww,
and if so, what can we do next? So I was like, well, but I thought you said you didn't want to. I mean, I didn't go down that road with them, right? I didn't say
right.
I said, hey, that's awesome. Here's a couple of options that you can consider next if you want to continue moving forward. I didn't try to make a big deal of it. I didn't try to, push them on. But you do, as a pastor, as a point person, the small group leader, think through, what are my next steps for the small group leader?
Right.
If they do choose to stay on for another 6 weeks or however long they choose to, make sure you have some things that you can encourage them. Hey, here's your next step. Here's a great study to check out. Here's how you can do this or that or whatever it may be. Just make sure you have that, because here's the other thing. I'm in their small group now. They kept growing it. And they're, like I said, they live in the same small town I do. They're amazing. They're better small group leaders than I'd ever hoped to be. An amazing couple. But yeah, right. So we gave them an easy. That was when also we said, hey, just host a group for your family. Right. There was one of those couples.
And then the Holy Spirit took care of the rest.
Exactly. They decided to bring a few people around them. Then here's the other thing in it. The people in the small group were the ones that asked, can we do this again? And so because it goes back to what you talked about with the group link piece. One of the great things about the group link piece is that, especially when you do it in a way to where that the people at the table, they all point to the leader.
Right.
That edifies and that builds them up.
Yes.
So because here's why they said they couldn't do it forever. They didn't feel qualified.
Right.
But when people in the small group gave them their vote of confidence and said, we love this group, what are we going to do next? They felt validated, and they felt encouraged to go on. And this was like 3 years later, and I was fast forward 3 years later, and they're phenomenal hosts. Now, have people come and gone from that group? Absolutely.
Right.
But the thing is, if we would have, in our context, if I would have had a lot of check boxes for them to qualify for, and if I would have said, hey, you're signing up, if I even said you're signing up for a year, not even life, they would have checked themselves out automatically.
Probably.
So when you're looking at new leaders, think through those things, kind of like, is it easy on, easy off? What's the clear expectations of a small group leader? What are we asking them to do? And then how can we continue to care for and support them if they choose to continue on in that regards?
That's great. Yeah, really, all of that. I agree with all of that. Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for your time. Daniel is a great ambassador for the Small Group Network. He's the regional leader for the Atlantic Coast. So if you are in a church in that area, please connect with him. You can find him on Twitter at Daniel Thomas. He's also pretty active on our Facebook page. So when this uploads, you are welcome to interact with him, ask him questions, and talk about whatever you'd like on our Facebook page. So Daniel, thank you so much. God bless you and your ministry.
Thank you, Carolyn.
All right. Well, thanks for listening to Group Talk. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Here to There, part of the Group Talk network of podcasts. If you like what you've heard, make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you want to learn more, make sure you check out smallgroupnetwork.com for more resources.